Hey everyone, I am Augo Doggo from Twitch, and I wanted to address a problem that I found with SteamVR's plugin for Unity making VR games in Unity 3D. There was one problem in particular that caused me a lot of glitchy behavior with the teleportation system. And it's not necessarily a problem with the SteamVR plugin, it's more of a problem with what seems to be the correct way to do it not being the correct way. So I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. So first off, I'll tell you what the problem is. So if you have an ignore teleportation trace script on any of your objects, the teleport trace, the line that goes from your controller to wherever you're trying to teleport, will actually still try to hit that with a physics raycast. So even if it's going to pass through it when it does hit it, if it's close enough to another surface that you do want to teleport onto, it can prevent the raycast from hitting that surface. So the ignore teleport script is only useful in certain situations, but even so, I try to avoid it now that I've noticed what the problem is. So I've fixed some of the problems in my game, and I've left others to show you what I'm talking about. So first of all, to go over where I discovered this, it's actually in the teleport script. So if we go down to where teleporting exists, we have, I'm just going to change this back to 1. That was some of my testing. So we have this script with all of these values in it. Now the important one to look at is teleport arc. Now, as you can see, it has these different values: segment count, thickness, arc duration, segment break, arc speed, material. The interesting ones is the segment count. So what this means is for the arc that's going to be projected from the controller, it's going to break it into segments, and each of those segments is going to have a raycast of its own. So if you have an arc that's going from one point to another point, from the start to the end of that arc, there's going to be 60 separate raycasts, which works great if you have all of your colliders spaced out. But for instance, if you look in my game, for an example, sorry, selecting everything at once, I have this head collider, which is a trigger, which when the player walks into this trigger collider, this character will start tracking him with their head and their pupils. So this, as you can see, is in the default layer. It has an ignore teleport trace. So oddly enough, when I point my controller to teleport right at this edge here, it catches this. It hits that with a physics raycast and says, you don't want to teleport here. There's nothing here. And then it goes, it doesn't check any more past that segment. So what you really need to do to avoid the floor below this being ignored is go back to your teleport, create a layer that's going to be your default. This is going to be a default that you don't want the teleport to go through. For me, I called this layer DefaultIgnoreTeleport. And just go into your teleport script where it says trace layer mask and make sure that that's clicked off. You don't want it to try to trace into those. Secondly, so just as an example, with this guy's head, we can remove this script and instead add him to the default ignore teleport. Actually, yeah, default ignore teleport, because he was default before. Now we're making him default ignore teleport. If you want to have something else, like a complex layer that you're using for something else, then I would highly suggest making another layer. Now, one very important thing for this, now that that's not going to cause any problems at the edge or near the barrier there, I would highly suggest making your other ones. Oh, right. So if we go down to project settings, physics, you're going to have to make sure that that you don't leave this default. This is the layer collision matrix. So in Unity, when you use this matrix, you're telling it for this row, these are the things that the default layer will collide with. Obviously, you want it to collide with the default because most of your objects might be on the default layer, and you want them to interact with each other. You definitely want it to be on the default ignore teleport. You want it to interact with those also because you want it to behave the same as default. So essentially, however you have your collision matrix set up for default, have it set up exactly the same for default ignore teleport. So as you can see, this line right here, this row should match this column for this. And that's how you know that it's going to act the same as default, but act slightly differently for teleportation. And that's all you need to do. And just make sure that you don't use the ignore teleportation script to ignore teleportation because it can be really glitchy. And I kind of had avoided it for a very long time. If you would like to ask any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll answer them as best I can. If I can, I will update this if it's inaccurate or if I get some editing software, and I'll re-upload. But for the time being, if you want to see more about my game, come to twitch.tv/agodoggo. I have a Discord where I hang out pretty much all the time and help out anybody with any questions that they have. And thanks for watching. And I hope this was helpful, even if I couldn't edit out all of the possibly non-important information. Thanks a lot.